There was a whole lot of shaking going on at the state capitol Wednesday, compliments of a major earthquake centered 10 miles northeast of Olympia. A singing group from Mongolia was set to perform in the Capitol building and had just stepped across the street to the Temple of Justice to meet Supreme Court Chief Justice Gary Alexander when the quake hit.
That's the Capitol. Is that where you're from? You were all from?
We're from the second largest city, Dhaka. But he's a politician. He's from the capital.
Oh, you're from the Capitol. And you're with the... Okay, we're okay. We're okay.
You and...
That's a big quake.
That was powerful.
Wow. That was powerful.
Doorway is the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, Lord.
Yes.
Praise the Lord.
Wow.
We have them about every 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
Stay in the doorway. And we worked that up just for you guys.
That was powerful. Whew. What a reception.
Throughout the day, TVW talked to legislators, state officials, and others to provide an ongoing report of how the quake has affected the state capitol.
We're visiting now with Howard Buck. He is the Olympia correspondent for the Columbian, the daily newspaper headquartered in Vancouver. Thanks for joining us, Howard.
Hi. We're all here and okay today.
What were you doing when it hit, Howard?
I was in the fourth floor of the House Legislative Building interviewing one of the members, Mike Carroll, and we were in his corner office together, and just all heck broke loose. Ceiling panels started coming a little bit, and everything was flying off the walls and jumping off the tables. And
You were preparing to write a story about what?
Non-parental visitation. There had been a bill that had died yesterday that the co-chairs, including Mr. Carroll, had a hand in. And I guess my first thought as a journalist was, well, so much for that story.
So now what are you going to write about?
Well, the reaction here, everything from our local lawmakers, I've interviewed several of them, just where were they, what did they experience, and now, of course...
Attention, please. Attention, please. The Plaza Garage has been reopened.
We're being interrupted by an announcement that the Plaza Garage, which houses many state employees' parking stalls, is now available to them to access so that they can go home. I'm sorry, Howard, for that minor interruption.
Right. Well, the first appearance is that everyone is okay and no injuries here, but the next step is when do we get back into business, because the building itself looks to be possibly structurally damaged, and depending on the damages around the state, it may be several days or even a couple of weeks before we get back to business here. And by later today, we'll know much more about that, but that's kind of the next step. The first step is on the scene reaction, our members, anybody and everybody. I've spoken to several. Thankfully, people are kind of shaken up, but everyone came out of it okay.
You, yourself included?
That's right.
Howard Buck of the Columbian, thanks very much for visiting with us.
Thank you. Okay.
Visiting now with Marcia Tadano Long. She's the director of the Department of General Administration, which oversees the operation of the facilities throughout state government. Marcia, thanks very much for joining us. First thing I want to do is have you turn around and show everybody this cool jacket you have on here, which reads Emergency Response Team. Is this the first time you've worn this jacket since you became director of GA 4 years ago?
It's the first time, and I hope it's the last time, Denny.
Can you confirm for us what we're hearing everywhere else, namely to date, nobody was hurt anywhere?
The only thing that I've heard of is that someone was cut on the leg with something that fell in their office, but we know of no other injuries, and we're happy about that.
The Department of General Administration is housed in the General Administration building. We are given to believe that it sustained some damage. What can you tell us about that?
We've actually done external assessments of all the buildings on campus. You can see some of the cracks that are very visible in some of the buildings, such as the Legislative Building and the Mansion. You also see probably more damage for the GA building inside. We are doing the internal assessments right now. Interestingly, what we saw coming out of the GA building was a fair amount of cracking in the hallways and in the stairwells. But we do have a crew in there right now, and we are waiting for them to come out to let us know if it's even safe to let employees in very small groups. They'll be escorted just to see if they can get their coats, get their belongings, get their keys.
But they are going home for the balance of the day, I take it.
Yes, I don't think there's any way that people are going to be able to work in these buildings.
Is that true of all of the buildings on the East Capitol campus as well that house the Department of Transportation and Social and Health Services, for example?
I have less information about East Campus right now, but it does take quite a while to do the internal assessment just to even find out if we can let people in or not.
Tell us, Marcia, about the people that perform this assessment on your behalf and that are employees of the department. Tell us exactly what they are doing.
Well, we're fortunate in that at GA we have a number of engineers and architects on staff, and so part of their other duties as required is to respond in case of emergencies such as this, especially in case of seismic emergencies. They're actually going through, some of the staff are rated to do this kind of evaluation. They're actually looking at the cracks, trying to see the probability of further damage, especially in case of an aftershock. They're trying to see stability in terms of stairs, entrances, doorways, all those kinds of things.
What's your number one concern at this point, Marcia?
Well, my number one concern would have been the safety of individuals. And from what I've heard so far, it looks like the people are safe, both those who work on campus, the legislators, elected officials, as well as members of the public. So the second really is in case of aftershocks, which I think we have to expect, how much other damage might be sustained. And of course then in the long term, what's it going to take to get these buildings operating and productive again?
That's where I was going with my next question, actually, namely, even before this assessment is done, is it fair to guess that we're going to require additional consideration by the legislature to go back and repair some of this damage in the form of an additional appropriation?
Yeah, well, it's hard to really be specific, but I think just with the amount of damage that we've seen so far, some work is going to have to be done. The other thing is we are likely to go out and contract for professional consultants to do the in-depth type of assessment as well as what's going to be required to do the repair.
I cannot recall if it was after the 1949 or the 1964 or 5 earthquake that considerable sums were invested in the Capitol or the legislative building to make it earthquake-proof. What do you recall about that?
There was significant investment done, I think it was in the 70s, not real sure, Denny, but there was a lot of work done where there was a lot of concrete poured in between the walls of certain parts of the building. Now, what's interesting, and I haven't seen the damage of the dome yet, but that enhancement pretty much went up to the dome, and we've been aware that we have to do additional work with the dome and the cupola. So it will be enlightening to find out what happened in light of this pretty significant earthquake.
Thanks for visiting with us, Marcia Tadano, Long Director of the Department of General Administration. I know you've got a job to do, so thanks for stopping by.
You're welcome.
This is Denny Hack with TVW. Less than 1 hour after an earthquake shook western Washington. I'm visiting now with Captain Eric Robertson of the Washington State Patrol. Eric, thanks for joining us. What do we know about the earthquake? Do we know where it was centered, what it measured on the Richter scale?
We've been told early preliminary estimates of a 6.2 out in the water, off of Stillicum. And so the shocks that were felt here in Olympia were some of the strongest in the region. And fortunately, to our knowledge, we have no injuries here on the Capitol campus. Everybody evacuated properly, and we're now telling everyone they are free to go home.
Is state government shutting down for the day then, Eric?
As far as the Capitol campus agencies, we've spoken with the agency heads, and they're releasing their employees to go home. And we're asking them to drive safe, particularly as they exit campus, because as you can see, it's pretty busy here. But
is power out throughout Olympia?
Well, power is out on the campus. I'm not familiar with the entire region here. We do have emergency generators on in some places. However, when people do end up going home, we ask them to make sure that they be prepared for any aftershocks, be conscious of the fact that they need to have an area that they can go to if they feel aftershocks. Doorways are a good place, under tables, and outside and open fields, of course, are one of the best places to go.
Any other advice for homeowners and citizens?
Assess your homes as you go home. Make sure that you're not entering a building that has received damage. Don't put yourself in further danger. Be cognizant of your preparedness issues and find a safe place to be in the event that there are aftershocks.
You said there was no injury in Olympia. How about building damage, facility damage? Do we have any indication of that thus far?
The Department of General Administration is assessing all the buildings. I know that the governor's mansion has sustained some damage. There are reports that are being investigated of damage to the legislative building, and that's why both of those buildings are closed and will remain closed throughout the day until their stability can be assessed.
Any last words, Eric?
Be careful, be safe, and be aware.
Thanks very much for visiting with us.
Thank you.
Now with State Senator Betty Sheldon. She is a Democrat from the 23rd Legislative District living in the Bremerton area. Senator, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, I didn't expect to be standing out here talking about an earthquake.
You thought you'd be in hearing voting bills out, didn't you?
I thought it was on the
where
floor.
were you and exactly what were you doing when the earthquake hit?
Well, the Senate Democrats were in caucus. We were all talking about bills, seated around a table, when all of a sudden there was this noise and this rocking, and everybody, for I don't know, maybe a second, maybe not even that long, is this disbelief. This can't be happening. What's causing this?
The deer in headlights reaction?
Absolutely. And then pretty soon someone said, under the table. And I will admit, everyone was under the table immediately, except we have one member who could not. Senator Fairley is paraplegic, and she could not get under the table. And, of course, you're very concerned about that. But I remember it took me a while to have it sink in, as I think it did for most of us. This is really an earthquake, and we're in the Capitol building, which might be quite vulnerable. But everyone was very calm, and as soon as it stopped, we moved out. And talking to the other senators and the other individuals out here, it's amazing that everyone is handling this extremely well, considering there's shock and you're concerned about your families.
Did anything fall off the walls, Betty, or off bookshelves or the like?
I hear in my office that everything on top of cabinets and such came off. We didn't see anything in the Senate caucus room, but I hear that in Lieutenant Governor's office, as you probably already know, a light fixture fell where his assistant, Linda Mitchell, would have been sitting. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of damage and mess, but it looks like everyone is safe, and that's what we're most grateful for.
Thank you, Senator Sheldon, very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Visiting now with Lieutenant Governor Brad Owen. Thank you very much for joining us, Governor Owen.
Thank you for asking me, Denny. An exciting and an interesting experience.
What were you doing when the earthquake hit?
Well, I was actually in my office having a little conversation with my chief of staff when the building started to shake. And kudos to the training that we got in elementary school. We headed straight for the door jam. And actually, in that vein, the false ceiling above my staff's desk came down, but the staff had got up and got between the door jam as well.
Did you lose a light fixture? Somebody walked by earlier and said you actually had a light fixture fall to the ground in your office.
A few years ago, several years ago, they had gone through and they'd put a false ceiling in the outer part of the deal, and the whole electrical and everything, the light fixtures and everything came down over the desks. That's why I say it was real wise of the staff to get up and get in the doorways. Let me just mention that about the kids. I was in junior high the last time that I remember this happened in 1964. For any of the parents that are wondering about the kids that are down here on tours, all the children are out, all the children are in the buses, and all the children are on their way home. Everybody's safe.
Great. Thanks very much, Governor. I appreciate your dropping by.
Thank you.
Washington. He's an attorney in the Walla Walla area. Dave, thanks very much for joining us.
You bet.
Did this earthquake reach as far as Walla Walla? Do we have any idea? Have you talked to your family or home yet?
I've tried to call home, haven't been able to get through, and I've stopped. I figure they have the phone lines pretty full with things that are going on just here. I haven't heard yet.
What were you doing when the earthquake hit, Dave?
I was on the phone talking to a constituent, and I had to interrupt them and say, I think we're having an earthquake. I'll have to call you back.
Were you scared?
No, not really. I've been in earthquakes before. I was honestly more concerned about getting people out of the building safely, and so I didn't really have time to be scared.
It's obviously too early to speculate because the engineers and architects are doing the assessment. But if it is determined, Dave, that you cannot re-enter the building for at least another day or two, Are you doing any contingency planning, or will the legislature just be put on hold?
Well, I think there'll be contingency plans being developed as soon as we learn what the extent of the damage and all that. Then we'll probably sit down, four caucuses and the governor, and sit down and figure out where we go from here. I don't think we're going to stop the legislative session. What we probably do is figure out how to continue, maybe at a different location here in Olympia.
Great. Representative Dave Maston, thanks very much for dropping by.
Thank you.
We're visiting now with Justice Gary Alexander. He is indeed the Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court. Justice Alexander, thanks very much for joining us. What were you doing when this happened?
I was in our courtroom, our lovely courtroom of the Temple of Justice, speaking to 5 or 6 visitors from Mongolia, and I think I had said, "Welcome to Olympia and the Temple of Justice," and it hit. And a woman was taking a video tape of us, and so I've since been shown that, and I did jump a little bit, it looks like, when it hit, but having been in 2 prior earthquakes, I knew enough that we should probably stand in a doorway, so we went over to that main entrance to the courtroom and waited it out.
Which 2 were you in previously?
I was in the 8th grade here in Olympia in 1949 when we had what we all call the big earthquake of 49, and then in 1965 I was a young lawyer here in Olympia when we had the other big one.
What was your reaction this time compared to them?
Well, I think as compared to 1949, when I was only in the 8th grade, I knew immediately it was an earthquake. That was one difference, whereas I don't think I appreciated that in 49. And I think also I had the presence of mind, because of those prior experiences, to get into a doorway, which I've been told is a good idea.
What happened to the Temple of Justice in this one? Do you have any preliminary assessment of damage or non-damage to the building?
Yeah, I walked around with our bailiff, Steve Engelhorn, and it looks like the building did fairly well. There's a lot of superficial damage, plaster that's fallen down, lights that have popped, bookcases that have fallen over, and so on. But to a layperson, I'm not an expert on this, it looks to me like the building is fundamentally in good shape.
And nobody hurt in the Temple of Justice
either? All present and accounted for, no one's hurt.
Chief Justice Gary Alexander, thanks very much for stopping by.
Thank you.
We're visiting now with one of the young people who has served as a page this week in the state legislature. His name is Zachary Collins. Zachary, where do you go to school?
I go to Chinook Middle School, North Thurston.
Which is in North Thurston
Yeah.
here? Yeah, what were you doing when the earthquake hit?
Well, I was on the internet looking for stuff to do with my homework, and then I was...
So you were keeping up with your homework even though you were paging. Zachary, I want to compliment you on that.
Well, and then all of a sudden there was just like the walls were shaking and everybody was stunned for like 5 seconds, and then all of a sudden everybody jumped on the window and people were screaming, and the lights...
Did you scream?
No.
What did you do?
I sat there and jumped under the table.
You got under the table? Where did you learn to do that?
School.
And have you had a chance to talk to your family yet?
Nope.
Were you scared?
No.
Not at all?
Nope.
More fun than anything?
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly going to be something to remember your week's paging by, isn't it, Zachary?
Yeah.
Thanks very much for visiting with us.
Uh-huh.
We're back now visiting with State Representative Luke Esser. He is a Republican from the 48th Legislative District in East King County, I think the Bellevue area?
Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland.
So I understand, Luke, that in 1989, you were somewhere else when an earthquake hit. Is that true?
That is correct. I was in the upper deck at Candlestick Park when Game 3 of the World Series was supposed to be starting. Unfortunately, there was a 7.1 earthquake on the Richter scale. The interesting thing is that earthquake shook Candlestick Park less than my office building was shook by the earthquake we had here today.
What we're being told is that this was a 6.2 versus the 7.1. Were you in your office when it hit, Luke?
I was in my office on the phone. I hung up. I apologized and hung up. I'm too big to fit underneath my desk, so I headed for a doorway and positioned myself there till the earthquake stopped. But it felt like a giant grabbed the O'Brien office building and shook it for about 20 seconds. It was pretty incredible.
So back in 1989, what happened after that one hit? Tell me what you did.
Well, it obviously got everybody's attention. There was nobody hurt at Candlestick Park, so we were kind of waiting for the game to start again. And then news started to filter in that bridges had collapsed and the Marina District was on fire, so obviously everything was put on hold. But there wasn't much damage at Candlestick Park itself.
Representative Luke Esser, thanks very much for visiting with us.
Very welcome.
We're visiting now with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Clyde Ballard, a Republican from the 12th Legislative District in North Central Washington, as well as the Majority Leader of the State Senate, Sid Snyder. He is a Democrat from the 19th Legislative District. He lives in Long Beach. First, Speaker Ballard, how are you?
Well, doing fine. We just want to make sure we had everybody out of the building, and we're reassessing what's going on right now.
Where were you? What were you doing when it hit?
I was in my office with 3 people talking to me, and it got pretty exciting in there.
I can well imagine. You said you shut down business for the day. The legislature won't be in for the rest of today, and tomorrow is what, an open question?
Right. What we're going to do, apparently they're going to try to at 1:30 to see if there's any chance to get back in to do an assessment, and then we'll try to get on the radio and let everybody know. But in the House, at least, we've sent everybody home. It's unknown out here right now, and we don't want anybody getting hurt.
Unknown and unnerving. You were pointing up at the Capitol Dome earlier about some damage you think may have been sustained and is a risk going forward. Can you describe what that is?
I was told by the State Patrol that 2 of the support beams are twisted, and they're concerned that if there's any aftershocks hit, what they're saying there may be a couple, that could come tumbling off of there, and especially if they're twisted, they're weakened, and also I understand the mansion has sustained substantial damage.
What kind of damage?
Walls split, supports, just said it's pretty bad shape.
But nobody was hurt to the best of your knowledge?
Nobody was hurt. They got the First Lady out and got the children out, and they're in a safe place right now.
Thank you, Speaker. Senator Snyder, you're one of the people who's been around here long enough to remember both the 1949 and the 1964 earthquakes that hit Olympia. Were you here in 49 when it hit?
I wasn't here when it hit. I worked about a month after the station was over in 49, and I'd been home about 4 or 5 days when the earthquake hit. But that was a very severe earthquake. There were very few people in the building. They had to take the dome down afterwards, piece by
literally remove the entire dome?
Yes, piece by piece, block by block, and they had, I remember seeing it, it took quite a while to accomplish that. And above the chambers, there's some glass skylights, but the metal that holds those skylights came down on the floor of the House of Representatives. And if they'd been in station, there probably would have been several deaths.
What about 1964, Senator?
1965, I wasn't in the building. That was Good Friday, by the way. And I was at the Tyee, and I was just ready to walk out the door from my room when the earthquake hit. And but we got here, and we walked in the building and decided to quit for the day and come back on Monday.
Do you remember what that was on the Richter scale in 64, 65?
I do not. I've been told the one today, if you haven't heard, is 6.5. And it's the epicenter was about 10 miles northeast of here.
Now, the Senate had a cutoff coming up later yet today, did it not? And what will you do now in response to that? And explain which cutoff it was, Sid.
We have self-imposed cutoffs to bring the session to an orderly conclusion. Today is the last bill to get bills out of the policy committees. The fiscal committee still have till next Monday to get bills out. The House, their cutoff was yesterday for their bills, and we had several meetings scheduled this afternoon to get bills out. I've talked to Senator West, the Republican leader, and we will extend that whenever we get back in the building. And
now that requires the cooperation of the House. Speaker Ballard, are you okay on that?
I'm with this senator.
And did you not say earlier, Sid, that one of your chairs had a very innovative approach to processing legislation this afternoon or this morning?
Senator Jacobson, who is chairman of the Natural Resources, Parks, and Shorelines Committee, he had a impromptu committee meeting on the corner, and he had about 8 or 10 bills that he was going to vote out of committee, and they are all out of committee subject to signature. So
legislative efficiency at its finest.
That's absolutely right. And Clyde, I want to know what you're doing out here without a coat on. It's cold.
I abandoned the office without thinking about how cold it was out, and I thought, whoops, bad idea.
By the way, if I can make one more, we were in the caucus. Senate, the Democrats and Republicans were in their respective caucuses, and of course, everybody dove under the table, except we felt very sorry. Darlene Fairley uses crutches to get around, and she wasn't able to get under the table, but everybody went to her rescue right afterwards. But the subject we were on were ergonomics.
But our elementary training held us all in good stead, did it not?
Yes, it did. Yeah, we all locked arms and nobody got any shoulders out of place or anything like that. So.
Senator Snyder, Majority Leader of the Speaker Ballard, thank you very much both for being here.
Thank you.
I'm glad.
We're visiting now with State Representative Mark Chesler. He is a Republican from the 9th Legislative District in Eastern Washington. What town do you live in over there, Mark?
Ritzville.
Where were you when the earthquake hit
Well, I
this
was
morning?
in my office this morning.
And what happened?
Well, it was like being in a small boat when it gets rough. It just kind of a rolling motion.
Were you scared?
No, it was kind of exciting, actually.
Had you ever been through anything like that
I'd never been
before?
through a bona fide earthquake before, at least anywhere close to it.
Ritzville's not exactly been the epicenter of a lot of earthquake activity?
We've been pretty safe other than Mount St. Helens dropping in.
And what about the person that you mentioned earlier who came in who had been here before?
Well, actually, Bruce Chandler's legislative aide had been...
Excuse me, Mark. Representative Chandler, who is a member from the Yakima Valley.
Right. And his aide, Julie Peters, was there. She was actually a tour guide here in 1965. Her first impression was, it is an earthquake and it is a real one, so we got out of the way of the lights that were swinging. It was her opinion that it was actually a stronger earthquake than she remembered in 65 when she was a tour guide.
As though your legislative session wasn't difficult enough, huh?
Well, it'll make it a lot more interesting.
Yeah, with a great deal more uncertainty. Representative Chesler, thank you very much for visiting with us.
You bet. Thanks again, Danny.
We're visiting now with Marty Brown. He is the director of the governor's Office of Financial Management, which means he's the chief budget writer for the governor. And my guess is you're going to be doing some more budget writing as a result of our excitement today, don't you think, Marty?
I think we'll probably be doing some rewriting. Yeah, it's very early to get any predictions on how much anything is going to cost us, but it's extensive, I think, right now.
What kind of a process will you put together right away to respond to all of this?
Well, the first thing we're doing is having general administration, structural engineers assess all the buildings, not just on campus, but all throughout the area that might have gotten affected, and try to decide what things first we can reoccupy, because we basically are kicked out of everything right now, and then figure out costs later on. I think early on we're going to have to figure out if we can get into the Capitol building or not. If we can't, how do we remove the legislature to a different place?
Is there any financial or cost implication to the state, Marty, besides just the damage to the state buildings themselves?
Not that I know of yet, but this one is bigger than most, so we don't even have a good guess, Danny. I don't know.
What's the governor doing?
The governor is up at Camp Murray at the emergency center. He's doing a flyover of the whole area, not just the Capitol area, to determine damage, to give a report back to the federal government too.
Where was he when the earthquake hit?
He was in the office.
With anybody in particular, and what did he do?
He was redoing a speech. He was supposed to give a speech to a water group today. He was redoing a speech with the ecology director. Both of them, I think, did some edits under the desk.
And what about damage to the mansion? We've heard various reports. Can the governor and the first lady and the children reoccupy it? If not, where will they go?
I don't know about reoccupying yet. I do know that at least on the exterior there are some significant cracks in the brick facing. Whether that is structural or not, I don't know. I know that there are people over looking at that right now.
Where was the first lady and Emily and Dylan when the earthquake hit?
My understanding is that they were in the house, that there were tours going on also at the same time, Wednesday's tour day. So we had a fairly good crowd in the mansion when the earthquake hit.
And everybody got out okay, no injuries at all?
No injuries that we're aware of.
Great, thank you. Marty Brown, Director of the Office of Financial Management, thanks for visiting with us.
My pleasure, Denny.
We're standing outside the legislative building where officials from the Department of General Administration are escorting small groups of people back into the building to collect their personal effects. And right now we're visiting with one of those that's just returned from the inside of the building. He is State Senator Don Carlson, a Republican from the 49th Legislative District, which is basically Greater Vancouver and my hometown. Welcome, Don. Thanks for...
Nice to be here, Denny. Nice to be out of...
What have you got?
This is a piece of the plaster that was directly above George Washington's monument in the foyer of the third floor. The piece had fallen on the floor, and as they escorted us out, I had a chance to pick this piece up. Looks like it's going to be a souvenir of some serious repair that's going to have to be done.
How many of these did you see lying on the floor in there, Don?
There are all over the floor, especially on the edges of the Senate where we do our business. On the Senate floor, there are a lot of pieces in each of the corners that had chipped. I imagine it'd probably be in the house as well. But this came out of the rotunda on the third floor, just above George's statue.
Is that a common size, or are they completely varied?
This was a pretty good sized chip. Most of the rest of them are smaller.
A structural engineer earlier told us that it's the corners that get attacked by earthquake activity, that somehow the vibration as it focuses and concentrates in the corners often results in this kind of damage.
Right. And the interesting thing in our caucus when the earthquake hit is that I was sitting next to the wall, and I'd been through earthquakes before, so I said, oh, that's an earthquake. And when that second jolt hit, I said, I'm going to stand here. I'm going to get under that oak table, which is nice, thick, heavy wood. So that's what most of us went until the tremors finished and we were able to walk out of the building with no problem.
Now, you picked that plaster chip up on your own, but you were offered chips as you strolled through, were you not?
I did. Brad Owen, Lieutenant Governor, had some serious damage to his office. One of the chandeliers fell, but he did go in and pick up some chips, and so he said, anybody want some chips? I thought he was talking about this kind of chips, but in fact, he was talking about the eating kind.
Product placement revenue forthcoming. Senator Don Carlson, thanks very much for visiting with us.
You bet, Denny.
We're visiting now with Tom Kinninger. He is the retired editor and vice president of the Columbian, based in Vancouver, Washington. Tom, thanks very much for stopping by.
You're welcome.
You're also a member of the State Board for Community Colleges, is that correct?
That's correct, and
you
why
were
I'm here.
Yeah, and you were on that business earlier today when this all happened. Where were you?
I was at Puyallup, at the Puyallup campus of Pierce Community College. And the floor rolled, and somebody said, get under the table, and I didn't hesitate for a moment.
You've been through them before, however.
Yes, sir. I've been through a couple of them, pretty severe. One in high school, 1949. One in the mid-60s in Centralia when I was managing editor of the Daily Chronicle. And the newsroom was situated between the front office and the back shop, the composing room. And instinctively I remembered, you're supposed to stay away from cornices. So I shouted at everybody pouring out of the back shop, stay away from the cornice of the building. It was only later that I realized the building had no cornices.
But you fulfilled your safety committee obligation
really
in spades.
I really did.
Tom Kinninger, thanks very much for stopping by.
You're very welcome.
Now with Dwayne Harkness. He's a senior architect with the Department of General Administration attached to the Division of Engineering and
Architectural Services.
Dwayne,
Right.
What is the Department of General Administration doing now to assess whatever damage may have occurred to the legislative building?
Well, our task has been in the last, hour and a half since the event to put together teams, basically two persons, one person at least who has taken some training in damage assessment, post-earthquake damage assessment, and we have been put into teams, and we immediately went out and made an immediate assessment on the exterior damage, potential exterior damage of the buildings, to make sure that there wasn't any potential catastrophic problems with being around the buildings.
Is that now your conclusion? There is no potential catastrophic external damage?
I'm not going to say that yet, because right now, presently, we have structural engineers who are in the dome and up in the lantern area of the dome where people observe pretty dramatic movement of the lantern. So we're quite concerned yet about what potentially might befall us up above. And so there is a concern about falling stone. If there's an aftershock, we could have some situation like that. But otherwise, it's actually quite remarkable how well, particularly the campus buildings, withstood this force. There are reappearance of cracks that may have happened in 49 earthquake, may have happened in the 65 earthquake. Those are reappearing, and we have some new ones. But otherwise, I believe the performance was actually quite remarkable. But there is a lot of damage, a lot of surface damage and so forth that we've been able to
One of the things that we've been pointing out all day is a place up on the outside of the dome where the blocks seem to have pulled away. These do not appear to be structural columns or blocks, yet nonetheless you can see an almost gaping gap.
Displacement.
Right.
And
what's the potential risk there for those to be dislodged and to actually fall down?
I think they are. It's fairly significant, and that's one of the reasons that we've been doing some cordoning off of certain areas of the building, because we don't want anybody near where these stones might come loose, particularly in an aftershock. I'm not sure how potentially this could happen immediately without another aftershock event, but I do think that I have not seen that myself yet, but I understand that's been observed. I observed here along this portico some widening of cracks and openings in the coffering, the soffit along behind the colonnade here and on the other side, and that's the reason that we cordoned this off. We don't want anybody anywhere near that in the case.
What's the going forward, Dwayne? How long do you think it will take your team of structural engineers and architects to make a final determination as to when the building can be reoccupied?
Presently, we had a goal. In fact, we had a goal for 1:30 to try to be able to make that assessment. I presume that we're going to be another at least a half an hour in making a determination, at least preliminarily, that we can allow folks to come in ushered, with folks come in and usher them in and get them in to be able to get their personal effects and so forth. But otherwise, to be able to occupy the building for business, right now we can't make that determination.
What's your worst fear, Dwayne?
My worst fear is an aftershock. My worst fear is aftershocks, and if we have any further events or anything on the order of the magnitude that we experience, because we could shake something further loose. And it's particularly the exterior elements of the building that we're concerned about, the displacement that you have observed, and other elements in the areas of the entries. And that's why we were very reluctant to allow people to go back in, and we'll be going in and just getting personal effects and getting back out if indeed we make that determination.
Have you had confirmation on what the Richter scale number was? Because we keep hearing different numbers. We hear 6.2, later I heard a higher number. There are always lots of rumors flying around at a time like this. Do you know?
Denny, I don't know. I haven't heard confirmation of that at all yet. All I know is the epicenter. I learned the epicenter was somewhere 30 miles south of Seattle, but I don't know what it was at this point here. Have not heard.
On the positive side, what's the best way the building came through this that surprised you the most?
On the positive side, I guess I'm so pleased that I'm not heard of anybody being seriously injured. There was a lot of stuff that fell. People had their computer monitors dropped to the floor. There've probably been some injuries associated with that, but I guess as an architect, again, I just marvel at the way the buildings were built and how they've been retrofitted over the years for seismic, actually how well they have performed in that kind of an event. So I guess I'm very pleased that we didn't have people seriously injured, at least, and the building appears to be restorable, and that, I mean, we could have had a significant loss here. We do have some significant issues and costly issues to repair, but presently anyway, cross our fingers, I hope we can proceed ahead with that.
I realize you do not have yet the final worker report from your structural engineers, but if you had to guess here, standing right here, right now, about whether or not the legislature is going to be able to resume its business in the facility tomorrow, what would your guess be?
I would guess no. That's me personally talking after having just walked through, and I was just in the House chambers moments ago. They're very up in the corners where, earthquake forces, they find the corners, and there's a lot of damage in the corners up in the ceiling area, a lot of spalling of ceiling that came down, particles of ceiling that came down. And the worry is that until we have a sense that we're not going to have any more experience with aftershocks, I guess my concern would be that is not a good place to be, just because of the kinds of particles and so forth that could still come down. I don't think anything catastrophic might happen, but I just think that you could have some chunk of plaster come down, pop you in the head.
Dwayne Harkness, Department of General Administration, thanks very much for visiting with us.
Thank you, sir.
All the way down from the 7th floor.
Any glass? That's that glass and paneled area, right?
It's cracked as you come down the stairs, but the glass is fine. We had one employee who we inventoried when we got outside, who we couldn't find. I sent a team back up, and somehow with the jolt, locked him in his office.
Wow.
And we could not get him out other than we broke down the door to get him out.
How'd they break down the door, do you know?
It was Dave Walsh and Fred Olson, and they took their feet and pushed the door in.
Who was it that was inside?
A guy by the name of Jeff Lane.
Jeff Lane?
Yeah.
He's a senior assistant attorney general.
Yeah, probably 30 years with the office, and
Kicked in the door then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where were you? I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I was on the 7th floor in my office, actually interviewing somebody for a job.
Are they going to get it?
Well, as I was under the table, I said to this person, "Heck of a way to finish off an interview. What do you think?"
Are there any legal issues that are going to be presented to the state as a result of this that you anticipate the office will be involved in? If so, what are they going to be?
Yes, we've gone over to the State Patrol Command Center and to the governor and described for them their emergency powers and what actions we think they need to take. with respect to those emergency powers and have the right to take. And then we've also been working with GA as to what they're going to have to do with their responsibilities on the campus.
Did you recommend to the governor that he declare an emergency?
I didn't have enough facts at the time. We outlined for him what his responsibilities were and what he was under law entitled to initiate at this point.
What would that mean if he were to declare an emergency? What would it mean in terms of the latitude of his decision-making authority?
Well, he's got to look out for water and the potential contamination of water, gas pipes and whether that has been destroyed, schools and school closures. He's got to look at whether he calls out, the guard. So we ask him to take a look at all of those issues and get an assessment as quickly as he can by emergency management to determine whether he needs to invoke his emergency powers and what contact he makes with the federal government to have us declared a disaster area.
David, is your building evacuated?
Yes, what we've struggled with the last couple of hours is the inability to get into the parking garage, which must hold hundreds of cars, and assessing the structural damage there to make sure that folks can get in there. That building right now is being assessed as well by engineers with the question of whether we can go back in.
They didn't empty it out yet.
Oh, no, it's empty. No, the building is totally empty.
The parking garages?
No, we're just now starting to let a handful of people go in at a time.
And you're in the licensing, what's commonly known as the licensing building on East Capitol campus, is that correct?
Correct. It's a 7-story building. And interestingly enough, was just renovated here about 6 years ago, and part of that renovation was to make it earthquake proof. Without that, I think we probably would have suffered considerable more damage.
Is this the biggest earthquake you've been in?
I remember in high school, I was just telling my daughter, I remember in high school, Auburn High School, under the table, looking out, and it was a 6.8, I believe it was, and watching the road buckle from that. So I remember that vividly, and I was expressing that to my daughter and her friends, that this is totally reminiscent of that.
1965, is that correct?
Right.
Christine O'Grady, a senior at Auburn High School, correct?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Chris Gregor, Attorney General, thank you very much for stopping by.
Thank you, Denny. Good to see you.
Always.
Yeah.
We're visiting now with State Representative Jim Buck. Representative Buck is a Republican from the 24th Legislative District, which is basically the Olympic Peninsula. He also happens to be, by both education and training, a civil engineer. And Jim, I understand you've been entirely through the House Office Building, otherwise known as the O'Brien Building?
Yes, we have. We went through partially because we're going to have to brief the speaker on the condition of the building. And a lot of things laying on the floor. Of course, the building is basically built on big columns with a very thick floor for each of the floors.
Is that a good or a bad thing when it comes to seismic activity?
In this case, this is a good thing, but there are very definite cracks at the floor level of each of the floors on the walls, and mostly that's cosmetic. We saw some marble damage, especially around the elevator shaft, which is reinforced concrete. So that didn't flex very much, but most of the damage appears to be on the 3rd and 4th floors.
What's your biggest concern about any damage that may have occurred to the O'Brien Building?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we've got right now is I don't think we got a structural problem, but we went up and took a look at the roof to make sure that we didn't have a problem where we were going to end up having water damage, and it appears that the membrane on the roof was intact.
So that would mean no water damage is
Right.
imminent as a result of this?
Right. We do have some broken water mains and some things in there on the 3rd floor and on the 4th floor. So that's going to be a while, but it looks to me like it would take, if we got everybody together, Danny, it would take 3 days to get the place cleaned up enough and get people back to where they were at 5 minutes of 11 this morning and to be able to start again. So this is going to be a little bit of a different drill than we've ever had before as far as legislative session is concerned.
What are you going to say to the speaker when you do talk to him?
We probably need to kick back and let people get their breath and get their heart rates down back to where they belong again, and then we'll just very, very carefully get in, make sure everything's safe. There's no live wires or anything like that, and then in a day or two start figuring out how we're going to get the place cleaned up and get back to work.
Have you been in the legislative building, Jim?
No, I haven't.
What do you hear about what's happening there?
The only thing I've been able to see is the damage on the outside to the east side of the dome, which I think you've probably looked at already. And it's pretty surprising to see something that moved that big, but this dome's been through things like this before, and it'll cost us some money to put her back together and get her plumbed up again, but we can do it.
What's your best guess as to whether or not you'll be able to meet on the floor in the legislative building in the next day or two?
Based on looking outside, I think that one's still up for grabs. There are people that are more skilled at this than me that need to take a look at it.
State Representative Jim Buck, thanks very much for visiting with us.
Thank you, Denny.
Talking now with Basil Badley. He's a lobbyist. In addition to that, he happens to be married to State Senator Mary Margaret Haugen, a Democrat from the 10th Legislative District. Like a lot of people in the state capitol, he's been here a while, and in fact was working here in 1965 when the last earthquake hit. Were you not, Basil?
Yes, I was Assistant Attorney General, assigned to represent the Insurance Commissioner, was right in the insurance building when that hit. I was going to take Commissioner Kukelan up to Seattle.
That was the elected insurance commissioner at the time?
Yes.
Kukelan?
Lee Kukelan. And I was taking him up to Seattle for a meeting at the Smith Tower. And I was in there getting my things at that end of the building when it hit. And those pillars you see were just bouncing around like a wet noodle. And there weren't the false ceilings at that time. They were plastered. Some of those fell down my office. I remember, and I went over into the a doorway, and when it stopped, I set a new world's record from that doorway to out here to the, to the wall.
Where were you and what did you do today, Basil?
Today, I had just finished a meeting with Speaker Ballard, and I finished there, and I told the group that I was with, I'm just going to go over to Barry Selene's office.
State Representative Barry Selene, also from the 10th Legislative District where you live, and the co-chair of the House Appropriations Committee.
Correct. And I started down the stairs when it hit. And I kind of made my way down and actually fell the last two and got up and was going to go get my coat down in the gulch, but the guy waved me out to go, which I did. So then I went out.
So how would you compare the terror, as it were, of the experience in 1965 with this one 36 years later?
Well, the one in 65...
You must have been a very young man in 1965.
Oh, just baby.
Yes.
That's just a baby. In 1965, it was more of a rolling quake, it felt like, and it seemed to get more notice that it was coming, and then it got intense and then went away. Today, to me, it was like going over a washboard road with no shocks, and this one seemed worse. The first one was my first earthquake, so it probably was took me a while to figure out what was going on, but I knew immediately this time what was going on.
And I take it you were not hurt when you fell down those last two stairs?
Oh, I'm a little sore, but no, I'm not hurt.
Basil Badley, thanks very much for talking with us.
Well, thank you.
Visiting now with State Senator Linda Parlett. She's a Republican from the 12th Legislative District in north central Washington, basically the greater Wenatchee area where you live, I believe, Linda.
That's right.
So what were you doing when the big one hit?
When the big one hit, we were in the caucus, the Republican Senate caucus, and right before we started our meeting, I had a page from Chelan, and I introduced her to the caucus, and then I sat down quietly by her, and I said, Ashley, you are welcome to stay for the whole caucus. You're allowed to do that in the Senate Republican caucus. But if it's boring, you can leave. And so she just sat down, and then the earthquake occurred, and where she was, I'm not sure. I wanted to get under the table, but all those men were under the table. There wasn't room. So I scooted under the little desk by the window. Somebody later said, Senator Parlett, don't you know you don't get by a window? And I said, but that was the only place left. And so under there. But afterwards, as we started to leave, the page came up to me and she said, Senator Parlett, I'm going to leave now. And I didn't realize till later that the pages are all trained to go to the World War II memorial if any disaster occurs. And I felt a lot better because I didn't know that until after the fact.
Those pages congregated there, and I was asked because, as it happens, my home is just a block away from the Capitol, if they could go be over there so that everybody would know where to find them. And about an hour later, I found out that they weren't allowed to enter my house because I've lost my chimney and I've had structural damage, and I'm afraid to go home yet tonight. Linda, did Ashley tell you whether or not she was bored by the Senate Republican caucus?
She didn't have time to tell me.
What are you going to do now that the Senate appears as though it is out until Monday?
Well, I will go home. I went into my office, which is in the Irv Newhouse building, and pictures are on the floor. I've got some things that are broken, but I just picked up some of my briefcases, and I actually picked up some in the Ledge building, too, that was on the floor in the Senate, so I had to wait to do that. I have to tell you another funny story. After we were evacuated, we all gathered between the Ledge building and the Sherberg and the JLOB building, and I saw Tom Fitzsimmons, the director of ecology. So he came toward me, and I said, "Tom," as we always ask, "where were you when that happened?" He said, "Believe it or not, Linda, I was in the governor's office talking about water." And I said, "That is an omen from God to tell the governor to stop messing around and do something."
Time will
That is
tell.
a true story.
State Senator Linda Parlett, thanks very much
You're
for
welcome.
talking with us.
Thank you.
Buildings at the Capitol sustained significant damage from the intense shaking. The quake cracked the ornate, massive stonework surrounding the outside of Washington's Capitol dome. A trip inside the Capitol building Wednesday afternoon revealed widespread damage. The Senate and House chambers were littered with debris, which the quake shook loose from ceilings and walls. In some places, pictures were shaken from the walls, and shattered glass coated the floors. In the Capitol building and other buildings around the Capitol campus, ceiling tiles and lighting fixtures were brought down by the shaking. Computers were overturned, and desks and rooms were left looking like war zones. Later in the day on Wednesday, legislative leaders were able to give a better prognosis for what the quake means for the legislature in the days to come.
Talking with State Senator Sid Snyder once again. He visited with us earlier today. Thanks again, Sid, for coming back by. We just spoke with Senator West. He informs us that the Senate is out until Friday and likely till Monday.
That's correct.
What's going to happen between now and then?
Well, we'll get an assessment on how much damage there is to the building, and if we can get back in by Monday, and some of us will be back in there before, some of the staff will be in because there was damage to their offices or some bookshelves in the other buildings that are off the wall and things like that, and clean the office up and give us a chance to assess it and analyze it and to see if we're going to come back into the building or not. And if we can't get back into the building, we're going to have a problem. Where can we find someplace to accommodate 147 members and
plus Governor Owen?
That's correct, and twice that many staff people and about 5 times that many lobbyists. So I don't know where that'll be, and I haven't looked at the Constitution yet, but we may be required to conduct the business within the city limits of Olympia.
Senator Snyder, you're often referred to as the legislature's one-person memory. This is what, your 52nd year you're in now?
53rd.
53rd year. I slipped a cog there. A few minutes ago, you just adjourned the session, the Senate, from the sidewalk outside the legislative building. Can you recall any incident in history that is anywhere near similar to that?
None whatsoever. In 1965, I was here when they had the earthquake. I was at the Tyee when the earthquake hit. Just ready to walk out the door. I drove in, and everybody went back in the building. I walked in the building. We stayed around and decided that it was a Friday, and they adjourned till Monday. And it happened to be Good Friday, and today is Ash Wednesday. I don't know if there's any significance or not, but maybe the good Lord is sending us messages.
And you're out again until Monday, then?
We'll come in Friday and be out till Monday, and we're going to have a couple meetings tomorrow to kind of find out where we're going to go.
Thanks again, Sid.
But thank you.
We're now standing outside the legislative building with Senate Minority Leader Jim West. He's a Republican from the 6th Legislative District in Spokane, and you've just adjourned the Senate for the day on the sidewalk. Is that right, Jim?
That's right. Probably first time in the history of the state.
So what's the plan now going forward?
We're going to meet tomorrow, the leadership, to kind of assess the condition of the building and how soon we can get back into our offices and chambers. We're adjourned until Friday. We'll probably adjourn again until Monday.
So you're adjourned until Friday. The Senate will not meet before Friday, and the Senate leadership gets together tomorrow, which is Thursday, in the early afternoon to do what?
Well, we're going to evaluate how soon we can get back into the building and maybe a contingency plan as to whether we meet off campus or someplace else, assemble Senate in another location.
Is anybody looking for another location yet, Jim?
Not yet. We'll decide that tomorrow. Probably make assignments tomorrow We got to get a word from GA. I walked through not too long ago, and the damage is appears to be cosmetic. You don't know what's behind the walls, what kind of structural damage there might be, but right now it just appears to be very superficial.
Is it your expectation that the House, too, will not meet again until Monday?
I'm not sure what the House is going to do. Senator Snyder and I are going to meet with Speaker Ballard tomorrow at the Sundial on Thursday and see what they're going to do. But we wanted to, as a Senate, to get together and kind of, we still have a cutoff. We're probably going to have to move the dates of that, the suspension of legislation. And we still have some committee meetings to be conducted that were scheduled to be done today.
Will committees meet tomorrow?
No, there won't be any Senate business until Monday.
Where were you when the earthquake hit, Jim?
In the caucus room. We were having a caucus meeting. All the senators, the Republican senators, were assembled, and we were just basically having a meeting around our tables when all of a sudden you kind of heard a roar, and then things started bouncing and jumping, and it was like being out in the ocean on a rough sea in a small boat.
And if your legislative session challenges weren't big enough, along comes a earthquake.
Why not? Maybe there'll be a flood too. When I started the session, because of the budget problems and some of the other big issues, the energy issues, I actually gave a speech someplace, and I said, well, this isn't the end of the world. The situation's bad, but it's not the end of the world. But we can see it from here. Well, we may have seen it today.
You got a little bit closer.
Just a little jumpy, but and we were discussing some legislation in caucus, and people decided, well, maybe that legislation wasn't all that important after all. So,
State Senator Jim West, thanks very much for talking with us.
Thanks, Dan.
We're now talking with State Representative Frank Chopp, who is the Democratic co-speaker of the House of Representatives. He represents the 43rd Legislative District in Seattle. Frank, thanks very much for coming by.
Yeah, thanks, Danny.
The Senate has announced that they're out for all practical purposes until Monday. What's the plan of the House of Representatives at this time?
I think we'll probably concur with that. That's what we talked about, is getting together tomorrow just to confirm that. But it looks
tomorrow being Thursday.
Thursday, yeah. So we'll probably be out until Monday.
Thursday morning?
Yeah, Thursday morning, that's tomorrow morning, we'll make a decision about it for sure, but it looks like we're going to be out of the buildings until Monday.
What information are you looking to get to help you make a decision about going forward?
Oh, just the basics from general administration, which is in charge of facilities. They got to go through the building and take a look at it. And we don't want to endanger anybody, obviously, and so we're just going to be careful about it.
Frank, assuming that there is basically a lot of cosmetic damage and perhaps some structural damage, but nothing which would prohibit you from re-entering the building, it will require you, however, no doubt to consider a capital appropriation request from the Department of General Administration. If that's the assumption, is there going to be any long-term effect from what's happened here today, which obviously is one of those unique life experiences that we all share? Is this going to have anything to do with your deliberations 4 weeks from now?
I don't think so, but as I was talking with co-speaker Ballard, it certainly puts things in perspectives. As bad as the budget problems are, this really brings you back to reality in terms of the big picture. But also, what's ironic about it is that there was a proposal to fix up the Ledge building, the Capitol building, with some renovations. Luckily, I guess several years ago, they did some earthquake-resistant repairs. So I thank God they did it back then, because it certainly looks like the building from the outside stood up pretty well. The key is to look at it in the details, look where the cracks are with the concrete and all that, to see if there's any danger signs.
State Representative Frank Chopp, co-speaker of the House, thanks very much for visiting with us.
Yeah, thanks.
There are still questions as to when legislative activity will resume. What we know now is that the legislature will not meet through Friday. In fact, staff has been asked not to try to come into work in the next 2 days. In those days, nobody except inspection and repair workers will be allowed in the buildings.
Bringing the public's business before the public. This is TVW.